So yes, I'm the storyteller that led the second part of this project when we moved online. Myself, along with my colleagues at the Village Storytelling Centre, we didn't initially believe that it would be possible to translate what is a very live and in-person art form online. We say in the storytelling scene, we work eye to eye and heart to heart. We believe it's face-to-face, this art form. And I think we probably share a lot of similarities with caring in that sense. So yeah, 2 years ago, I didn't think it would be possible to move online, but it was. And in fact, although of course we lost some aspects of physical connection, we did gain some others that were unexpected. We were able to broaden out our reach and talk to even more people. And we also removed some of the barriers. It's always my aim as a storyteller to help to make a conversation feel like it's happening around a kitchen table, sometimes, or in a pub, to have that atmosphere of friendship and warmth and fluidity of connection. And suddenly we actually were in people's homes, around kitchen tables, sitting on sofas. Sometimes we had conversations with people already tucked up in bed. And this intimacy and this connection led to some really profound discussions, and probably we were able to get deeper than we might have done otherwise. But what is storytelling? It's a very hard thing to describe. It's kind of like a pomegranate. You know what it tastes like if you've tasted it, but it's very hard to articulate that to someone who's never tasted it. So I thought I would take the opportunity to share with you a short story. And this is the story that I used the most in the last year. And it's quite appropriate for today, this crisp, cold day. So I hope you're all sitting comfortably and maybe have something warm to drink. And we'll begin. This is a story about a man who lives in isolation from other human beings. He lives alone in a forest in Argyll. That's where I am right now. He lives in a little hut. It's a very simple life. He has a small fire in the corner. He has some baskets for his things. During the spring and the summer and the autumn, the forest can give him everything he needs. He can gather berries and have honey. He can catch wild salmon and wild garlic and pine nuts. He can make a delicious salmon pesto meal. He can get fruits and he can catch animals. Not all the time though. But in the winter, when the ground is hard, like today, life is much harder for him. He can't grow things and he can't collect things. And so this man, he needs to make a little bit of money. He gathers firewood and he takes it to a nearby village to sell. He gets a little bit of money from that and he can buy supplies. But these exchanges are never happy because the villagers are very quick to point out, he's not like us. He doesn't live in a house like us. Do you know he lives in a hut in a forest? And he probably smells as well because he's a forest dweller. And do you know what? He's ugly. Have you seen the size of his nose? Have you seen the huge hunch he has on his back? And the man did have a hunch on his back, but he never realized until it was pointed out to him so cruelly. They were whispering, but of course he could hear them. But he could never say anything back because he didn't have the power of his voice. He was what they called a mute. And the little children, they were the worst. They played this game where they threw little stones and they'd get 10 points if they could hit it off his head. And they'd get 100 points if they could get it off his hunchback. And so the man would leave the village, yes, with supplies, but not feeling great at all. I said this man lives alone, isolated from humans, but he wasn't alone entirely. He had around him a community of animals. They were his friends. And when he left the village back into the forest, his best friend, the ferret, would run up to him, wrap himself around his neck and whisper in his ear, "You're beautiful. You are beautiful. Don't listen to them." And his friend, the crow, would squawk on his shoulder, "Nah, they're all wee creeps anyway. They're creeps." And the robin would flutter about his head, talking about equality and diversity and sharing equally our supplies. And he was a bit of a Marxist. And the squirrels would be doing backflips in the trees, making him laugh. And soon he would feel better. And they'd share the supplies and they'd play together and they'd chat. They buoyed him, his friends. And every evening, this man, he would go to the loch side and he'd stand there and he waited, because it was there that every night he saw the love of his life. He was in love with a swan. And as the sun set, he saw her coming into land, elegantly, beautifully, soft on the surface of the cold water. And he'd yearn to call out to her, but remember, he doesn't have his voice. He yearned for her and he wished that one day she would swim over to him and they could maybe be together. But she never did. She just turned her beautiful head and swam away. She was not interested in any men. She knew what those men were like. She saw them in the village. They tried to chase her. They threw stones at her. And so she never went to him. But sometimes she did go to the place he'd been standing when he'd left and pick up a little present that he'd brought for her. And so life was like for this man. He led a brilliant life in the spring, in the summer, in the autumn. He had everything he needed. He had his animal friends, food to eat, warmth. And in the winter, life was harder. He'd wait every day for the love of his life who gave him no interest, and he'd be with his animal friends. And time passed and the seasons passed. And soon life got even harder for the man, because the little boys that threw the little stones, they became big boys that threw the bigger. And so he'd leave the village not only feeling dejected, but limping and in pain and injured. Until one day he didn't appear at the village to sell his sticks. And it was the coldest day of the year. And the villagers, they said, not only is he not like us, not only does he have a hunchback and he lives in the forest, he's also lazy and he's not getting any more of my money. And they didn't even ask, where is he? What's wrong? Of course, the animals did. They went straight to his hut. They went inside and they saw him lying out on his simple mat. He was very weak. And they knew immediately that he was dying of a broken heart. And so only the thing that he loves can fix it. And so they rushed to the loch side just as the sun was setting on this cold winter's day. And they saw coming into land the love of his life, the swan. And they waved to her. The ferret was jumping his little paws in the air. The crow squawking, come here, get over here. And the squirrels jumping and the birds fluttering, the robin calling, please, we need your assistance, please. And so the swan comes into land, much less elegantly this time, all her feathers all askew. And she hears them saying, our friend loves you, he's a good man, but he could never tell you because he doesn't have the power of his voice, he's a mute. Please, he's dying and he needs your help. And she thinks about that man that stood there every evening, never tried to chase her, often left her tasty treats. And she thought, okay. And so they took the swan to the man lying out on his mat. And I don't know if you can imagine what that would feel like after so long, having the person that you love the most in your own home. And they made eye contact. And the swan, she put her head on the man's chest. And he stroked her long, elegant neck. And she pulled a feather from her wing. And she plunged it into his chest. And the man began to transform. His hunchback started to open out. And huge wings emerged. Beautiful, strong swan's wings. They'd always been in there. They'd just been curled up. And so 2 wee swans left the hut that evening. They waddled down to the side of the loch and they took off together into the sky. And that's the end of that. So that's a Scottish traveller's story, which is about Argyll, where I'm from, where I'm living right now. And it's a story I shared a lot during this process, and I think you can see why. It's got so many of the themes that are resonant with the conversations that we went on to have. A lot was happening when I was telling you that story. First of all, when you share a story, it gives an unconscious signal to other people that this is a space of sharing stories. So one story is shared and then all of the others follow. People want to share their empathy, share their experiences, reflect. So stories, sharing a story like that traditional story, opens the space for other conversations to happen. It sets the tone of the conversation. This isn't your normal consultation. This is the space where we can use our imaginations, where we can, anything is possible as well. Also, we think about how we're feeling before we tell the story, and hopefully in that storytelling session, your adrenaline levels decreased and your serotonin and your dopamine levels increased. So we feel better after we've heard a story. We feel connected to and like we've been cared for in that moment. When you think about it, young children, when they stumble over to their parent or their caregiver with a book, they don't care what the narrative is. They don't even know that there's something called a Gruffalo, probably the younger ones, but they already recognise that this book symbolises deep connection with your primary caregiver, a moment of probably of proximity, of closeness, of communication, of being seen and heard, of being loved. So all of that we can tap into with these moments of sharing stories. You probably won't remember any of the details of that story, or maybe even what I say next, but you will remember how that made you feel. And I think that's the really important thing about story in this dementia context. We also work with non-fiction, so anecdotes, autobiography, the day-to-day life, particularly in Scotland, how we communicate. We start with gentle questions, and these seem so insignificant. For example, how do you take your tea? But immediately people can respond and feel like they've got something to say on this matter. And they see very quickly that everybody has something to say and that everybody's interesting and worthy of being heard. And that's not always the message that the people that we work with, and sometimes the people living with dementia, receive on a day-to-day basis. So just knowing that they're interesting and worthy of being heard can open up a lot of confidence and expression. The final technique, so we use non-fiction, autobiography and anecdote. We use fiction, which is the story of the man and the swan that you just heard. But we also use a thing called one step removed. So that's a style of storytelling which feels real. It could be real, it could be any one of us, but it's not. We create characters together. And these characters share similar experiences. So in the workshops with people living with dementia, that character would have had a dementia diagnosis recently, or unpaid carers, they would be an unpaid carer, or a staff or volunteer working with people with dementia. And onto those characters, we can impart our experience and our empathy, but in a safe way. We're not asking people to share the most difficult moment of their life. That's not appropriate in that space. It's too intense and exposing. But we can say, we've created this character called Kathy. How is Kathy dealing with her recent dementia diagnosis? Have you got any ideas? Have you got any tips for her? And through Kathy, through this vessel that we've created, this story, we can express our own experiences in a much safer way. And the people talking can regulate their level of disclosure. So we use story to create a safe space in the group, but also a safe emotional space. So that's a little bit about how we work. And I think storytelling, particularly in dementia contexts, has so many applications. It's a very powerful tool. And I've come to appreciate that more and more as this incredible project has carried on, has got underway. And when we think about one of the issues, one of the big struggles people seem to have with dementia, and particularly I say this from experience, my gran found this the hardest, that she felt so much pressure to recall accurately, to recall fact and to be correct. But immediately with storytelling, that doesn't matter. We're in the world of the invented, of the constructed, of our imaginations, or of the deeply personal. And so it's your opinion. So we take all of that pressure off of trying to be correct and giving the right response. And for all of us, the world that we live in is completely narrative. If you think about it, the past, it doesn't exist anymore. And it probably never existed exactly in the way we think. When we think about it, when we recall it, we're creating a narrative based on the most likely set of circumstances to us at that time. That's storytelling when we remember. And when we think about the future, that also doesn't exist yet. That is completely imagined. And one of my main goals is to encourage adults to invest in their imagination, to believe themselves to be creative and able to picture the life that they want, because we have to have imagination skills in order to imagine the future that we want and create a better life. So you are all imaginative, you are all creative, you're all storytellers, whether you know it or not. And we know this is a deeply, we understand what storytelling is, I think, deep down inside. And that often that happens when people don't know what storytelling is. And then I tell a story and they go, oh, that, yeah, I know that. And that's because we've been doing this since we've been able to talk. This is part of our lives, and I think in a really beautiful way. So enough of me blabbing. It's time to move on to the national priorities. So these are the priorities that we gathered from each local authority over the last few years. The themes that seem to emerge over and over. And we took the local ones and we've looked at them, well, LCT have looked at them carefully, and they've been able to draw out the main themes which are affecting people living with a dementia diagnosis, those who are unpaid carers and those working and volunteering. So we'll move on to the priorities now. Check my slide. There we go. Oh. Priority 1. Human rights of people with dementia and unpaid carers need to be recognised. We would like to see more emphasis on our rights as citizens to be able to access information and services that recognise us as individuals and that support and empower us. Just because you have a diagnosis of dementia, it doesn't automatically take your rights away or mean that you are unable to make decisions for yourself and your own life. Priority 2. Dementia diagnosis needs to be timely, supportive, and delivered in a familiar place. There can be very real problems with getting a diagnosis. How long it takes, how many people are involved, and the delay in being offered any kind of support. An early diagnosis of dementia is crucial, and there needs to be a joined up approach so that support is not fragmented. Priority 3. We need effective post-diagnostic support. We want better information and access to post-diagnostic support. Support must be personalised and flexible. We need to reach people at the point of diagnosis so that support can be provided for both the person with dementia and for unpaid carers before they reach crisis point. Priority 4. We need to place greater emphasis on the role that communities play and the value they have in supporting people with dementia and unpaid carers and in delivering post-diagnostic support. Dementia is not just about the individual, it's about the community and its response. We want to see better recognition of the vital contribution that local communities play in ensuring that people are empowered and included as part of the community and not apart from the community. Priority 5. Services should be planned, commissioned, and delivered using lived experience. We want decision makers to make decisions based on an understanding of what it is like to live our lives. Support should be person-centred. We want to be asked and not told. Priority 6. Carers have rights too. We would like to see more emphasis on the support and services we need to better enable and empower us. Support must be timely and respectful. Many statutory commitments don't feel like reality. Carers are often at the end of their tether. They need to be listened to and supported so that they don't get to crisis point. And finally, priority 7. The value of peer support should be better recognised. We need places and time to have conversations where we can share our experiences with others who have been on our journey. We can provide each other with mutual support, understanding and guidance. There are too few opportunities for this. Hear, hear. And that is our priorities. So I just want to say personally and from the village, thank you so much for allowing us to be part of this journey. We've all improved as practitioners and I think as people and friends and members of our communities as a result of this. This is the end of this project, but it's the beginning of a lot more work with the legacy partners and for myself